This is the 15-minute summary of a 40-minute presentation. So some of the points it only touches on or skips over. Why would a lawyer listen to Wordsworth? After all, didn't he write poems about songbirds? He wrote 6 poems about songbirds, 3 about butterflies, 6 about flowers, including the one about daffodils that I want to focus on. That is not the business of lawyers. The main business of a lawyer is to take the romance, the mystery, the irony, the ambiguity out of everything he touches. What did Justice Scalia mean? A good example would be the drafting of a prenuptial agreement, which is entirely inconsistent with the romance of a wedding. Any joint venture agreement has to look at what happens if the parties fall out, which they don't intend at the point when they're embarking on the venture. It seeks to cover every adverse outcome and to preclude uncertainty. So as lawyers, we spend our time looking for problems. What could go wrong? Whose fault is it? Negative thinking is a job requirement. One of the lawyer's key skills is analysis, breaking things down. And that analytical work is satisfying and worthwhile. But there can be unwanted side effects. There's a growing body of work on the topic. For example, this thinking like a lawyer is fundamentally negative. It's critical, pessimistic, and depersonalizing. Thinking like a lawyer is a tool for the job, and it's a problem if it becomes your habitual way of thinking. It's a problem because our thoughts drive our feelings. The idea was first articulated in Roman times by Epictetus. It is not things themselves, but the thoughts we have about them that disturb us. And then it was rediscovered in the 20th century by the psychologists and the psychiatrists who invented cognitive behavioral therapy. Things themselves are neutral. They lead to thoughts, and if those thoughts are negative and pessimistic, that leads to mood which is depressed. So thinking like a lawyer, the lawyer's negative frame of mind can lead to depression and anxiety. This is the condition diagnosed as lawyer brain by the US psychologist Dr. Larry Richard. Thinking like a lawyer is also a matter of the language that lawyers use. The only reference to daffodils that I could find was in this very turgid piece of secondary legislation. We use the language of analysis to nail down the subject and kill it, really. And it has been said that legislation contains no more emotion than a redundant bird's nest. And the same would be true of a prenuptial agreement. If we turn to the poem, we immediately see that the poet is not a lawyer. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills. The lawyer does not wander. The lawyer is purposeful. In contrast, this is a detached, dreamy, spaced out perspective where we can be surprised, we're open to insights. The language is at the opposite end of the spectrum to the language of legislation or of contracts. In that first line, I wandered lonely as a cloud, there's a strong rhythm exploiting the natural rhythms of the English language. And in the second line, we see a real sing-song rhythm because of the use of monosyllables, and the keywords are the stressed words as the line goes on. that float on high vales and hills. High hills is alliteration, and if you want to see the power of alliteration, compare the American belt and suspenders with the British belt and braces, although the Americans have their stars and stripes. We also see a more complicated pattern in the use of the L's, lonely, cloud, floats, vales, hills, which is a mixture of alliteration and consonants. Up to this point, of course, no rhyme has emerged. That emerges with the following two lines: cloud, crowd, hills, daffodils. And a rhyme makes a chime. It's musical. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. The grammar seems simple, but on closer inspection, it is patterned as well. So beside the lake, beneath the trees is something known as bicolon, and the classic example of bicolon is out of sight, out of mind. Beside the lake, beneath the trees. This patterning of the language gives the poem a musical quality, and this musical quality is all important in the context of the dancing flowers. The word dance appears 4 times in the poem, once in each verse. Legal analysis doesn't harness the full power of language to communicate. It has no use for it because it seeks to exclude emotion. Wordsworth consciously shapes what he sees as he progresses. So a crowd becomes a host. A random grouping becomes an ordered grouping in the sense of an army or a host of angels, patterned or information. Again, fluttering, chaotic, progresses to dancing, which is patterned. We know the daffodils are yellow, they become golden. Lonely at the beginning of the poem turns to the bliss of solitude, as we'll see at the end. This mental process travels in the opposite direction to analysis, because analysis starts with the pattern and breaks it down into component parts. The poet is building something, and the tool that underlies the words is imagination. We can watch the operation of imagination because we have Dorothy Wordsworth's prose account of the scene. So we can see how Wordsworth's imagination transforms it. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle in the Milky Way. That's quite different from a long belt of daffodils along the shore. Never-ending line. 10,000 saw at a glance. Again, she says, we saw that there was a long belt of daffodils along the shore, not 10,000. Wordsworth is expanding what was a view into a vision. He relates the scene to the infinite, the eternal, the Milky Way, a never-ending line. He's evoking the sublime, which is defined as that which produces an overwhelming sense of awe, reverence, or high emotion by reason of great beauty, vastness, or grandeur. So we can return to the quote from Epictetus, but modify it now. It is not things themselves, but the thoughts we have about them, not that disturb us, but that delight us, depending on what the thoughts are. Looking at the diagram, the thing, the daffodils, they're pleasant, but essentially neutral. Then we have Wordsworth's thoughts on those things, transforming the things, crowd to host, fluttering to dancing, continuous as the stars that shine. And that creates the mood, the delight, the sense of the sublime. So let's spot the difference. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. And then, of course, the The difference is a lawyer could not but be gay in such a jocund company, which is not what we would expect. The right word there is a poet could not but be gay. And it's true of a poet because it's about the poet's imagination transforming the world. Outdid the sparkling waves in glee. The poet's mindset breathes life into the scene. Look at the next line. I gazed and gazed. A prolonged, mindful gazing, not the hasty rush of a lawyer. The final verse appears to be about Wordsworth's ability to recall the scene and get pleasure from it. But Wordsworth understood that art is not what you see, but what you make others see. And although he pictures himself on the sofa, what he's actually doing is to direct the reader's thoughts. He coaches the reader. When he says the daffodils flash upon that inward eye, what he really means is that they flash upon the reader's inward eye. The reader visualizes them in his mind. It's a good process, a good description of the process of reading. The reader feels the bliss of solitude, feels the pleasure, the brush with the infinite. Our own imagination has been fired. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Wordsworth knows how it feels after a bad day in the office. He writes in the prelude, depressed by false opinion and contentious thought, or aught of heavier or more deadly weight in trivial occupations and the round of ordinary intercourse. And the core of his message is to offer revival through the imagination. What he says, he offers a renovating virtue, whence our minds are nourished and invisibly repaired. I'll give almost the last word to John Stuart Mill. When he was 21 years old, he suffered from depression. He recognized that the habit of analysis has a tendency to wear away the feelings when no other mental habit is cultivated. And he suffered from this depression for about 6 months, I think, and eventually got out of it and credited his recovery to reading Wordsworth's poetry. What he said, what made Wordsworth's poems a medicine for my state of mind was that they expressed states of feeling and thought colored by feeling. I think Mill got one thing wrong. He says thought colored by feeling, but it's the other way around. What the 20th century psychiatrists have told us is that feelings are colored by thoughts as much as thoughts are colored by feelings. And so in that sort of CBT diagram that I showed you. So in the end, what Wordsworth has to say to lawyers is, one, make sure you leave your thinking like a lawyer behind you when you leave the office. Introduce imaginative thinking into your life, which also requires you to adopt the language of the imagination. And two, that will stop you, hopefully, from descending, or may help to stop you from descending into the depression and anxiety that some lawyers are prone to suffer from. Thank you.